Okay, Mayor, we are live.
Okay. So today is June 9th, 2021. The time is 6:42 p.m. and I am calling to order the City Council and Planning Commission special joint virtual meeting. City Clerk, can I get a roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Damian,
Here.
Councilmember Garcia,
And I'll make a, oh. So I believe Councilmember Garcia.
I'm here, Lulu.
thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Hernandez,
So I'll make a motion to excuse Councilmember Hernandez and Mayor Pro Tem Alejandra Avila. Can I get a second?
Second.
and Mayor Estrada.
Here. Thank you for that.
Also, I would like to take roll call for the planning commissioners.
Yes.
Planning Commissioner Garrido,
Present.
Vice Chair Borges,
Here.
and Chair Sines.
Here, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. City Clerk, is there anybody looking to speak?
No, Mayor, comments will be taken at the end of the presentation, and there's also a feature to provide comments via the chat.
Great. So at this moment, we can move on to the open session study session.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. This is Ben Martinez, the city's Community Development Director. We're happy to have made it this far in the process in updating our downtown specific plan. I also just wanted to, so thank you for joining us, our consultant team, Mayor, City Council, our consultant team, residents and others that have participated in this process. We really appreciate the time and effort, also to our fellow city staff members that have helped us get this far. I also wanted to just briefly mention that our new CEO, Enrique Saldivar, who is present with us tonight, I was able to, in the few hours that he's been with us, I've been able to brief him as much as I can on this particular item, and I'll be obviously doing more of that in the near future. But welcome, CEO Saldivar. And without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Ron Garcia, our city planner, and with a note and the caveat that this is an important item for the city moving forward with the downtown specific plan update, but it also definitely keep in mind it's definitely related to another major project that we are doing, which is the housing element update. And that's because a lot of the housing that we can count and plan for in our housing element update related to our general plan would come from the downtown specific plan. So that they are very much connected and should be considered. And we're going to be having, as Ron will explain, hearing on the housing element update soon. Thank you, Ron. I'll turn it over to Ron.
Thank you, Ben. And again, welcome our new city manager to this joint study session. Again, good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council, and the Planning Commission staff and the public. We've been working diligently along with the consultant team, Rungwala and Associates, since June of last year. We're excited to present to you tonight the draft of this TOD specific plan as we prepare to bring this plan for adoption before the Planning Commission and City Council in August. This plan encompasses all of the work and input presented to the community among the stakeholders. Also would like to remind everyone that this could not be possible without the State of California Housing and Community Development Department, HCD, awarding the city $310,000 through an SB2 planning grant, which essentially helps cities and counties prepare and adopt and implement plans to accelerate housing production. This effort, and I emphasize this effort, assists the city, as Ben mentioned, meet its obligation in complying with the State Regional Housing Needs Assessment, referred to as RHNA. As you recall in previous presentations, the total number of new housing units allocated for the city of Baldwin Park is 1,996 units, which is inclusive of all income categories. As Ben mentioned, on June 23rd, we'll be holding a joint study session with the council and the Planning Commission to present the draft housing element document prior to sending the document to the state for review, as the state requires that cities have an adopted housing element adopted no later than October of this year. As we move on with the presentation, we're going to take community comments first, and then move on to the Planning Commission, and then final comments from the City Council based on the presentation of the draft document. There are two ways that you can do that: by raising your hand to allow you to speak, and we will unmute you, or you can freely just use the chat box to provide your comments for the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the baton to our well-respected downtown consultant, Mr. Kaiser Wangwala.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mayor Estrada, council members, planning commissioner, welcome city manager, CEO. Look forward to working with you, sir. And staff and community members. Good evening to all of you. The purpose today is for us to continue the process that we've been in for the last 9 months or so. And we have periodically come to the Planning Commission, periodically come to the City Council, and listen to your thoughts, your feedback, incorporate that, and come back again and have regular updates. So this is one of those updates with the Planning Commission and City Council. But this is a momentous one because based on the direction we received at the last meeting, the last joint meeting, we have now produced a draft for the downtown specific plan. And we want to walk you through, there's several components of the plan. I'm happy to delve into the details of any specific area that you would like. So I'm going to go through the brief part of the presentation and then we can hopefully delve into the question and answers. Just to recap, we started the process back in May, and since then we've had a number of update meetings with the City Council, Planning Commission. We've had focus group meetings with the community. We've conducted interviews with key stakeholders, and we've hosted a virtual shred. A little bit about that shred in a moment, but that included us working with the community members for a period of 3 days, continuous. And then after the shred, the outcomes of the shred were presented at a council meeting. We wanted to make sure before we proceeded to get some direction from the City Council. Based on that direction, we have drafted this document for your edification this evening. So we are in June, and we are hoping to complete the environmental documentation which is required for this draft plan and bring this before the Planning Commission and City Council roughly in the July-August timeframe, certainly by fall of this year. So the charrette was conducted in a virtual setting, and that's the handsome guy is Ron, sitting as a computer, participating with other community members. Unfortunately, we were at the peak COVID period, and as much as we would like to have engaged the community in person, we were barred for health reasons from doing that. But we had a very successful charrette over a 3-day period. Community members, planning commissioners, city council members participated and provided feedback, including stakeholders from the downtown. We worked through the 3 days. The format was in the afternoon, we had some talks. We presented some ideas, some concepts, some trends, and some information that we had collected on Baldwin Park to make sure that we had a good base to work from. And then in the evening, we started working on concepts. And we would come back, we would present some concepts, we'd get feedback from the community, we'd make amendments, we'd make changes, we'd bring it back. And we worked through the iterative process for a period of 3 days. At the end, we came up with a consensus master plan for the downtown area. And that was presented, again, as I mentioned before, to the council before starting documentation. But the question, and I think Ron posed this, like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing the downtown specific plan? Why is this necessary? And I think as we look around Southern California and the nation, we're all facing a series of crises. Certainly fiscal, coming out of COVID, and housing crisis, the crisis for equity, health, COVID related, as well as public health crisis because of the preponderance of cases in terms of diabetes and high blood pressure, particularly in the Southern California region. And then the impending crisis that we face in terms of climate change. And I would submit to you, as I've done before, that the downtown provides a very cogent and a very potent response to all of these crises. And I think that's the reason why the downtown is such an important component. Downtown plan represents such an important component for the city as it moves forward. So I'll cover a couple of items related to fiscal and housing, and we can talk about other crises and how this responds if there is additional interest. But this is your revenue source. I don't have to remind you, you know this very well. Sales tax and property tax constitute a huge component of your revenue that's coming in. We did a market demand analysis, and part of that market demand was to figure out the leakage that was occurring. Leakage is when a person from your city, from the downtown, goes to a neighboring downtown because those same amenities are not available within that area, within that downtown area. So if I go to, for example, to West Covina or Covina to shop at the mall, that is dollar that is leaving the community, that's leaving the downtown, and going into neighboring communities. As you see, there's leakage in restaurants, specialty retail, and the specialty retail is experience-based retailing, clothing, and home furnishing appliances. But in addition to that, you can take a look at the development pattern. We'll discuss this a little more, but to emphasize a point, in your downtown area, 50% of the land is dedicated to parking. Now, parking as a use doesn't generate any revenues. It supports a business, but as acres, there is no revenue generation from that acreage. In addition to that, and we can look at the parking spaces. There are about 1,287 public spaces and 2,089 private spaces. Your parking, we did a parking analysis, and this is pre-COVID. So we took a look at the aerials, we took a look at the patterns pre-COVID to figure out the occupancy, the usage of the parking. There was about 55% occupancy in public parking spaces and 62% in private. So there is a lot of excess parking in the downtown that is not generating revenues. In addition to that, you have 60% of the businesses in the downtown that don't generate any sales tax. And that's because your downtown is largely geared towards service users. And we'll talk about that as well in a minute or so. The other crisis is the housing crisis. And regardless of the moral issue of providing, our supply in the Southern California area hasn't kept up with the population growth. As a result of that, we are seeing high prices for housing, which has stressed our supply. And we're finding, and every time every time I pass a tent on a street, and it's everywhere. It's not just in downtown LA. It's also in neighborhoods and along corridors. I cringe because I see that as a failure of my profession, as a failure of my being a planner, that I haven't been able to provide in whatever capacity that I play a role in this crisis. Nevertheless, that's a moral issue. But the state has stepped in and saying, you know what, this is not no longer a moral issue. It's going to be a legal issue. You, the region, have to provide a set number of housing units. And the region then comes to the Southern California region, in our case, CAD, comes to Baldwin Park and says, you must provide 2,000 units. That's your legal obligation. It's not moral anymore. You must provide that. Now, where in the city are you going to provide? That's a question. Where are you going to provide 2,000 units? You're a city of 75,000 people. In the past 2 decades, you have barely grown. It's a fat line growth. Your growth peaked in the 1990s and the 1970s when you had growth spurts. But since 2000, you actually lost population. So here is the state coming in and saying fix that, provide 2,000 more units, and do that in the next 8 years. So that's a legal obligation that the city has to meet. And I think the housing element discussions that will follow this presentation in a week or so we'll get into that more. But again, the downtown presents an opportunity to address this crisis and to address and to provide and increase the supply of housing. This is a highly complex issue, highly complex problem, has many solutions, but one solution that everybody agrees on is we need to increase the supply and keep the supply in pace with population growth to meet the current need, the current demand that exists in the community. I'm not even talking about future demand or future growth. So those are a few reasons. In addition to that, there were some boundary adjustments that were made to the existing specific plan. You already have a specific plan for the downtown area that was adopted in 2016. At the bottom, you're seeing the boundaries on the right-hand corner, the existing boundaries of that specific area. In the proposed specific plan that we have before you tonight, we've amended those boundaries, and we've amended them for a number of reasons. One, to correct some errors. That senior building that you see right across the city hall, it's half in the downtown specific plan and half outside. That doesn't make sense. So we've corrected that. Then there are some opportunities that were brought to light, such as the county public works site, triangular site north of Ramona. That was added. In addition to that, we considered providing, and this is direct feedback that we received at the community meetings. The community was interested in having more property south of the rail tracks, south of Downing, to be added to the specific plan. Some of those are single-family residences facing parking lot and a station. That just didn't make sense for the long term. So allowing that to be incorporated and allowing that buffer actually protects existing single-family residential neighborhoods around the downtown area. So we have expanded the boundaries of the specific plan area. There are 3 main objectives, and they are interrelated. The first one is place, and when we talk about place, we're talking about experience, creating a distinctive advantage, a distinctive place that is very distinctively Baldwin Park, because it is building off the assets that you have that are unique to your place that other cities don't have. So that creates a distinct economic development and a distinctive marketing advantage. And we're going to take a look there at public realm design, creating contextual infill that provides the units, provides retail, provides all of the amenities that you need, but at the same time is respectful of the context, particularly at the edges where it shares edges with the neighborhood. And we have addressed that both in the plan as well as in the code. And then building off your arts and culture and leveraging the arts and culture to encourage prosperity, to encourage local businesses, and to encourage entrepreneurship, and to have smart policies about patterns of development. Again, I have a couple of slides that I want to share about the patterns of development and the prosperity resulting from different patterns of development. So we have options, and we can think about those options as we think about the future. And then in terms of mobility, we want to accommodate all modes. We certainly don't want to disturb any of the driving patterns that you have, but in addition to that, look at streets to also provide for bike lanes, to also provide for safe, comfortable, and enjoyable walking paths for people who do want to walk, and using existing parking more efficiently, perhaps than you currently are. So these are three interrelated concepts, and I'm going to be all over the place. The presentation is not broken down into distinct sections, and you'll see why. So in terms of patterns of development, on the upper left corner is a very early diagram of downtown Baldwin Park in 1927. So if you think about 1927, what's happening? You have transit line running on Ramona, you have the red line, and most of the development is either served by transit or by walking. Only the very affluent people have cars in the 1927s. But look at the pattern of development. Look at the grid. You have a very interesting grid. You have a north-south grid that is almost rectilinear, but then you have this diagonal grid that comes and intersects with Ramona and creates wonderful opportunities for public realm enhancements. The comparable example of people who have traveled to New York City will know what Broadway does in Manhattan, where it diagonally cuts the grid. So there's wonderful grid system that you already had in 1927. And particularly notice the downtown grid. As you get closer to the downtown, the grid gets more granular. You have more options to get around. It's more walkable. You have more options on how you move around. Now look at the pattern of development that you have today. You have the aerial on one side, and I recognize it's a little difficult to read. So what we have done is we've taken essentially a figure ground drawing. So what you see in color are the buildings. And what you see in white is the ground. And as you can see the grid pattern, you see the grid pattern come in, but when you come to downtown, that pattern begins to break apart. You're seeing more sort of open space, more of white. And that's directly related to the influence of the automobile. Automobile requiring more space for parking, more space for moving around, requiring larger blocks. In many cases, streets were vacated to make room for large developments with large parking lots. So this is your downtown today. This is an aerial from taken recently, and I have to say, at first impression, and even the lasting impression that I have of the downtown is you have wonderful assets. You have wonderful assets in Morgan Park. I think it's a gem. I mean, all of the things that you have in terms of programming and structure, it's one of a kind. You have the train station, you have the civic presence, you have City Hall, and you have arts, and you have the art center with the historical museum, and you have retail. You have essentially retail that serves the community, besides the adjoining neighborhood. You have 3 grocery stores and 3 or 4 ice cream stores just in a small area, which is just phenomenal. So you have all of these assets. And then when we're looking at it, how do you link these assets? Because what we heard when we interviewed people, and we also talked to council members, I know in the very first meeting, many of you grew up in Baldwin Park and you remember walking to the downtown for ice cream or just hanging out. You can't do that today. You can't walk around. It's not really walkable. And even driving, we were told by a few people during the interview is a little bit of challenge because of how certain streets are configured. So there are some issues that we wanted to address in the specific plan effort that were brought up by the community. In particular, looking at opportunities to link these assets. So as we look at the downtown area, and what you see here is a 5-minute walk. That is essentially a template that we use. People tend to walk 5 minutes before they will get in the car. So we want to have neighborhoods and districts that are walkable, that are mixed use, so that people have options to walk in addition to driving around. And they can walk to the daily needs, they can walk to the park. So you have all these assets and they're colored in black. And the best opportunity to link these assets is to look at your public realm, to look at your existing streets, and to look at the open spaces, and to weave these together. And obviously, besides the open spaces, the private facades, the frontages also play an important role. Because if you're walking from A to B, if you're walking a shopping center, a parking lot, that's one experience, versus if you're walking a main street environment with shops along the frontage with windows that display the merchandise with street trees, that's a completely different experience. So that experience needs to be curated as well for the downtown area. So we start with the streets. Ramona is your signature corridor. And, we're getting in the summer months, and oftentimes you see the weather report, and the weather report will say, well, it's 90 degrees, but it feels like 110. The same with Ramona. It is 100 feet wide, but it feels like it's twice as big. And the reason for that is because you have the right of way, but then beyond the right of way, you essentially have parking lots. So spatially, it feels like a larger space. Now imagine all of us are in a virtual setting. Imagine the room you are in, right? Look around and think about the walls that you have. Now imagine the walls being pushed apart 20 feet, and how would you feel in that space? Or imagine your roof being not 8 or 9 feet, which is probably what it is, but imagine it being 50 feet with the same dimension. How would you feel? So we react differently to different spaces. The spatial proportion of streets and open spaces is incredibly important. You have 2 lanes in either direction, and then you have on either side, you have a continuous row of perpendicular parking, angled parking. Over the years, you have made attempts to soften the landscape, add trees. But think about, again, the scale. And I'm going to show you what the outcome of the shred. So just by adding street trees, and in this case, the choice is Sequoia. Sequoia is a very fast-growing tree and has a high canopy. What you're doing is essentially you're subdividing that space. So instead of it being 200 feet wide, now you're perceiving it as 10 feet or 20 feet quadrants with a ceiling where the human being feels comfortable. Now imagine being a human being on the section above, and imagine being a human being in that environment on the section below. So this is interim. And we're not changing any of the building footprints. The buildings are where they are. But imagine adding more of the street trees, adding protected bike lanes, on-street parking. So on-street parking is still there. It's preserved. It's not angled. and imagine creating a promenade. And if you do all of those things, people will want to bring their buildings closer, and you certainly have a room then, an outdoor room that feels comfortable, that becomes your signature corridor, and that could transition from something that looks like this today to something that could begin to look like a place, that is unique, that builds on local assets, where your street doesn't feel like it's 200 feet, but you're perceiving it in smaller chunks because it now has a ceiling, and that ceiling is the canopy of the trees, and it has amenities that are along the street's edge that make the pedestrian feel comfortable. So in this case, the long range scenario, and this is all of the things that we're presenting today, and we presented and were discussed at the community, are a panoply of ideas, for you to select from. It's a menu of items. You do what you like, and you do what makes sense at whatever time frame, and you build off of it. So these are not hard and fast. The plan doesn't live and die on any one concept, but collectively they create the overall community vision. So I'm going to walk you through the individual pieces, and you can collectively put these pieces of the puzzle together in whatever configuration you so desire, as you implement the plan. So one of the things that we considered is you have this parking area in the front, which essentially came into being because you had a transit line going through Ramona, which was vacated. The trolley line went away. You had this access right of way, and you converted it into angled parking. That angled parking is at best 50% used. So you have access parking. Now, what we are suggesting is maybe reconceptualizing that space, and it could still be a parking lot. So all of this could still allow parking and could be resurfaced or repurposed on certain days to allow for use as open space. So it's not something that you need to do as a permanent change. It could be temporary. You could do it over a weekend. You could and take it away and return it back to its parking use. So think about these things. Obviously, the tree placement, where you place the trees would become an important component of that. And we need to give that some thought. But the thought again is to perceive this as a promenade that begins to activate this boulevard and creates and activate the frontage along that edge along Ramona. And it's only a particular section of Ramona. It's not a continuous promenade. The other item that we address besides Ramona is the linkage between your two assets. You have a wonderful asset in the station. It's your connection to the region. It brings in riders, potential tourists, potential spenders in your downtown from the region. But your downtown, you sort of have a disconnect right now because the platform is on the south side instead of the north side, which is the site where you have your downtown. So there are various ways to look at it, some short term, some long term, and we had some initial discussions with Metrolink. They have some plans for the future with how they want to proceed. They have one track right now. They may be looking at 2 tracks, which might provide opportunities to discuss how the station functions and how the station relates to the downtown area, whether it relates to the residential community to the south or whether it relates to the downtown that you have to the north. And we were looking at how best to establish these connections. Obviously, you have opportunities at Pacific to enhance the connection from the station all the way to the Pacific Avenue, and then Main that connects into downtown. But if you're looking north, improve the connection at the northern junction. But you also have an opportunity to create something midpoint. And that could be this connection that you have from where you have the garage, right next to the garage, opening up into Ramona. So you'd be connection from the station to Ramona. The caveat is that Metrolink needs to approve a platform or at-grade crossing that would allow people to cross. And that's a long shot that requires a number of studies. But again, these are presented as ideas to pursue in the plan as options. We have a couple of options, an interim option that shows what if Metrolink says, no, that's not going to happen. But what if Metrolink wants to play and says, yeah, we're doing 2 tracks, we are redoing the station. There are opportunities that the city can entertain. And that experience of the alley could be enhanced. It doesn't have to be a back of the room operation. Lighting, landscaping can play a critical role, and activating that dead frontage, activating the frontages of that alley could also create a better link between the station and the downtown. And then Baldwin Park Station, wouldn't it be great? I mean, your name says it, Baldwin Park, and you come to the station. It would be great to have a park right at the station. It doesn't have to be a park; it can be a plaza, but some kind of open space that serves as a gathering space rather than opening up into a parking lot. And we're looking at mobility hubs at the station. Mobility hubs are essentially places where once you get off the train, your first mile, last mile connection can happen in a variety of modes of transportation. It doesn't have to be an automobile. It could be an automobile, but it doesn't have to be a single driven automobile. It can be a shared automobile. It can be micro transit. It can be bikes, shared scooters, a number of opportunities. The important concept here is curb management. What you allow to be parked along the curb's edge, whether it's a bus, whether it's transit, whether it's shared automobiles or electrical cars. But looking at those options and looking at the space at the station and enhancing the pedestrian experience at that station. The other concept is about network, and network is about connections, providing many opportunities for people to get from one place to another. Again, at the interviews that we conducted with stakeholders, we were told that it's difficult to walk in the downtown area because you have these large parking lots. And we're looking at how, and you have a grid system, it's just being clipped in a number of places. So wherever it's clipped, you have opportunities to reintroduce that grid and reintroduce those connections. One of the things that we looked at is crossings. The frontage between Baldwin Park Boulevard and Main Avenue is 1,300 feet. That's a quarter mile. So if you want to cross, you have to walk quarter mile to cross Ramona Avenue. And that's not very ideal. In the downtown, it should be, there should be a crossing every 200, 250 feet. In this case, we're proposing a crossing right at Sterling, which allows people an opportunity. It's a mid-block crossing that allows people to cross. Another one along between Main and Bogart, which can provide again that link to the train station through the alley that runs by the parking garage. And the frontage right now between Main and Bogart is 800 feet. Again, that's excessive without having an opportunity to cross. So we're looking at how to connect, how to make these connections, how to enhance the intersections. So they serve for the automobile, but they also serve for bikes and for people who choose to walk. We've taken a great deal of attention, paid a great deal of attention on the landscaping. Different landscape, different trees for different environments, different places that we are trying to create throughout downtown, and create a palette of trees that provide rich diversity. But again, looking at that concept that we were talking about, you have these assets in the downtown, and we want to connect them with the public realm. The public realm needs to be interesting, comfortable, and safe. and the open spaces and the streets provide that opportunity for those connections. During the interview, we talked to the person who runs the Baldwin Park Plaza, and a couple of individuals suggested that they were interested in long-term plans for redeveloping that site, and based on some of the interactions we had, they were interested in doing mixed-use development. So this is just one of several configurations that could occur, but it again begins to talk about the quality of development, the things that Planning Commission, City Council, and the staff can be looking at when they approve redevelopment on that parcel, whenever that occurs. It may occur in the next 5 years, 20 years, or next 50 years beyond this planning cycle. But as you look at the aerial drawing, or pardon me, the rendering at the bottom, it shows the pattern of development, which could be four-story buildings along Ramona, but they step back as they come into the neighborhood, as they meet the neighborhood into 3 and 2-story buildings that are arranged around a new park site for that neighborhood. Branding is an important concept. Again, it helps increase civic pride, address some out-of-date perceptions about the city or the downtown if they're present, and place Baldwin Park on a map. One look, one message, present a distinctive and compelling vision. And what we have done is we pointed out some locations in the downtown that are your gateway sites, that are paths, that are nodes, that are edges that need to be identified and branded. And we provided an initial palette. Obviously, you need to run this and give it some detailed thought about the design, but we've gotten you started off the various components that go into creating a branding and a sign package for the downtown area. And the design can follow. The detailed design and the construction drawings can follow later. We have worked with your community service department, and we've identified the parade routes, the street closures. You guys are party town. You know how to throw a party. You throw a party, and 15,000 people from the region come to it. I'm looking forward to that in the future. Unfortunate that we couldn't experience that during this planning cycle because of COVID. But we're wanting to celebrate that. We want to make sure that you have the right frontages that can take advantage. You have some dead frontages in your downtown area, particularly on the south side of Ramona, that could be lined, for example, with outdoor cafes, micro retail. And then in the new neighborhoods, you can reconceptualize and use the streets. There's a concept of Sunday streets. On Sunday, you close some of these streets in the residential neighborhood and give it to the kids. Let the kids go out and have fun. And these are areas around parks. So these are again utilizing public realm, utilizing streets, not just as places for moving cars, but for bikes, for walking, and as open space and as part of the open space network. The downtown mix. This just getting back to the economic development component. 75% of your downtown jobs are mom and pop businesses. You have a high focus on service sector. About 44% of your jobs are in the service section, and therefore 60% don't pay sales tax. 18% is grocery, retail, grocery stores, and general merchandise are your largest employer in the downtown. You have a very small component, 10% of restaurant. And I think that needs to grow. And as you saw the leakage diagram, that's where you have a great potential to increase your productivity. But even those 10%, 63% of those spaces are fast food restaurants. There's nothing against fast food, but that's not your distinct advantage. A fast food establishment in your town and in a neighboring town, it has the same one. You're only going to attract people from your community. You're not going to attract people from neighboring town because there's nothing special, nothing distinctive about the food that is offered there. So that needs to be given some thought. 60% of the businesses, again, in the area don't generate sales tax. Shopping centers account for about 60% of your retail space. I wanted to present these two slides. This is work that was just completed a couple of weeks ago in Montebello. This is Urban 3. Joe Minacosi, who was part of our team, did this presentation on fiscal MRI for the city of Montebello. But I think there's some lessons that might be of value because this is he's done this for a number of Southern California towns, including towns all over this country and all over the globe. So the lessons are very transferable. And what we're looking at here is revenues per acre. So if you look at revenues per acre for a shopping center, for example, in Montebello Town Center, it generates $1.7 million per acre of revenue. That's what can be taxed. That's what comes to the city's coffer after it being taxed at that level. Comparatively, Walmarts anywhere in Southern California are averaging about $2 million. So that's just sort of a benchmark. And you can go around and look at the shops at Montebello. It's $5 million per acre. So this is how much revenue is coming into the city's coffer in terms of property tax when you tax it at $5 million. For Montebello Plaza, it's $3 million. Now remember these numbers: 3 million, 5 million. Walmart is at 2 million. Compare that with this Beverly corridor. This is a corridor in the heart of Montebello. Those buildings, that two-story building, is generating $11 million, over $11 million per acre. The building next to it is 7.5 million, and the building next to that is 10.3 million. Now the concept is very simple, and I like to think about this, and Joe describes it as when you are in farming and you're concerned about how much productivity you can get from your acre. You plant your trees in a row. You don't plant 5 trees in an acre, and that your productivity will be only the crop that you yield from those 5 trees. You plant them in a row. When you have a campfire, for example, the way you have a fire, the way you have economic fire and energy in your downtown is you bring things together. You bring the wooden blocks close together. You can't have wooden blocks away from each other and hope that they will ignite each other. The same concept applies in your downtown. They need to be close to each other. They need to be stacked over each other to produce value. And when you do that, the values that they produce compared to the shopping centers is far, far more, at least 2 or 3 times more. And we've shown that in Montebello, and we've shown that in a number of other cities across America. So pattern of development is incredibly important. And this is reflecting the pattern. This is also walkable. This is also drivable. So it allows for both walking, driving, and biking experience to occur. One of the things that this also allows for is and supports is entrepreneurial businesses, particularly makerspace incubator type businesses. These are often described as hot sauce, handbags, and hardware. Oftentimes, if you take a look at your business license, particularly during COVID, if you take a look at who is having a business license in Baldwin Park, and you see people operating from the garages, or you see people operating from the kitchens, and they want to expand. Where do they expand? Downtown is a great place for that expansion to occur. And if you think about these spaces, which you already have in your downtown, some of them are underperforming, to be occupied with local entrepreneurs, you're also addressing the equity issue, making economic wealth and making the community part of that wealth growing enterprise. These are typically 1 or 5 people, small businesses. Obviously, the failure rate in small business, and particularly entrepreneurial businesses, is great. But people keep on trying, and you work through.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is that a word for me to stop?
I'm
No,
sorry.
I think, Robert, if you can mute, Robert, thank you, Robert.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Kaiser.
So these are small businesses and they require anywhere from 500 to 800 acres. They are small cottage industries, manufacturing, producing products, producing stuff. And some of that stuff can also be offered as retail. Now, what's unique about this is because this is small scale, the wealth remains in the community. So every dollar that you spend here remains in the community because it's local. And it provides a distinct advantage, which you can't find here. You cannot find online. You cannot find in a neighboring city. So this is really important and something that needs to be looked at. In addition to that, one of the things we found missing in Baldwin Park that you could certainly use is, and we've made this part of the recommendation, is to enhance your economic development capacity, particularly have somebody whose sole business 9 to 5 is downtown Baldwin Park. Somebody who can, a business improvement district is one of the models, and there are various models that you can look at. But successful downtowns have maintenance programs, they have security programs, they have marketing programs, and all of this, and they operate in a proactive mode rather than a reactive mode. Right now, Ron's taking whatever comes at the front desk and processing that permit. He's not going out and seeking those small businesses and looking who's willing to expand and who's willing to move from the garage or kitchen into the downtown area. So having that focus in the downtown might also be something that the city may want to look at. In the plan, we have a funding toolbox. We have identified a number of funding options, from special district financing tools to grants, trade, local and federal programs, to working with developers in many areas and through agreements to get these improvements and public-private initiatives. And what you see on the right-hand side is a small table from the plan document. I just wanted to present this as an example. You can take a look at in much more detail. There are a series of policies, and for each policy and action, we're calling out a time frame. We're calling out who the responsible parties are that will carry out that task. And we've sort of assigned dollar values. This is like almost like a travel guide. This gives you a sense of what the low-hanging fruits are, things that you may want to do immediately or in short time frame, because it doesn't really cost money. It just takes some initiative. But there are other things that you may want to plan for the future that might require a longer term planning. And then the funding sources are also called out. Here's the interim plan. The interim plan pulls together various public realm improvements, open spaces, streets, and some development that either has expressed interest with the city or the city council has issued some ENAs that we know are impending, that there is interest for these parcels. So we've identified those as phase one. Obviously, this is completely flexible and things can move around. But what we wanted to create is an interim plan that shows how Ramona, for example, could go from its existing condition to the final condition. Well, it's a series of steps, series of small steps that you can take depending on your funding availability and depending on when people are bringing their development applications to engage in private agreements and in public-private arrangements to get to your final vision by working through smaller bits and pieces. So this is the interim, this is the final, and the final, again, this is not a 20-year plan. This may not even happen in our lifetime, but it's working with the end in mind. And having the end in mind and then working backwards. So this is the grand vision, 100-year plan, and then we can take incremental steps towards that greater whole. And then here's sort of an aerial view of the of the downtown area. Again, Ramona Boulevard is your signature boulevard. With a little bit of TLC, it becomes a signature corridor in San Gabriel Valley and hopefully in Southern California, and it begins to connect all of your assets together with some existing and new open spaces, and then having the right frontages for development creates a very comfortable and safe and walking environment, including driving. Again, I want to emphasize, we're not reducing any lanes in Ramona, whatever the 2 lanes in each direction still exist. We're just enhancing the other component, which is to making it bike friendly, making it walkable, making it sustainable, where people will want to come closer and open up businesses along that corridor. Oftentimes, this is where the plan stops because this is the vision. And as I mentioned, this is a panoply of ideas that you select from. You select what you like, you build what you like in the increment that makes the most sense at that time. But the regulating document is oftentimes disconnected. And we wanted to make sure that you were not in the same boat. So we've created a very unique place-based code that is very specific to the place. And I'll walk you through some of the components. This is a regulating plan. And in contrast to the zoning plan, most of your planning commissioners will recognize, zoning plan doesn't show proposed open space. This one shows that. This one shows the proposed open space. The focus of this plan is the public realm, not the private realm. The private realm, what happens in terms of uses is left up to the market. So it's a very market-friendly approach. Rather than calling out uses and uses, pages of uses and uses, it defines uses more generally, but defines the public realm with a higher degree of focus. In order to create contextual infill development, all of these districts have a massing diagram that you see on the right-hand side, where you can add a level. So if a 4-story building is allowed, you can add a 5th story, provided you take comparable amount of square footage out from the back where it meets the residential community. So you're creating a very contextual building mass. In terms of the regulating plan, the corner of Ramona and Main has the most intense development in the downtown. That's your 100% intersection. And as you walk away from that intersection, you have the orange, which is the corridor, which is slightly less intense. And then the surrounding area, which is the downtown edge, which is where the downtown meets the neighborhood, is even less intense, almost to the same intensity as a single family residential neighborhood that it abuts. And then there are some special features that we have called out we're not going to regulate and we're not going to require retail on all building corners, because the last thing we want is to require it and for a retail use to remain fallow because the market is not there. But what we are saying is, in very key intersections, you will provide frontages that are not dead walls. You'll provide shop fronts that allow people to engage. And those are called out in yellow lines at the corner of Main and Ramona. And then there are some other lines, other dotted lines that you're seeing, which is essentially creating a building enclosure, an outdoor space with building mass. And that's important because if you're driving around and you don't have a vertical frame of reference, you don't know whether to turn left or right. But if you have a building there, then you know that building is defining where the street is, because the space between the buildings is the street. So we're calling out for certain spatial enclosures for placemaking, but also for vehicular safety. These are pages from the code that talk about setbacks, that talk about height, but also talk about open spaces. So we are not just talking about open spaces that would be required for larger projects to provide public open spaces, but also a continuum of open spaces that are provided on the private lot. So if you have a single family residence, that private lot happens to be in the yards, but if you have a courtyard building that happens to be in the courtyard, or if you have an apartment building, you could provide balconies and terraces. So all of those requirements for open spaces, private open spaces, are also called out. We're calling out building sizes and separations to make sure they're not block scale buildings. And then frontages become incredibly important to avoid dead frontages. And you have some of them in your downtown area, particularly on Ramona. Different building types have different frontages. If you have a retail, you want to have a flushed retail with the street's edge that is transparent to allow people to see through. But if you have a residential building, it's quite the opposite. You want privacy. So you want the plinth of the residential building to be raised and further away from the street. So those frontages are called out and spelled out in this code with very broad standards. Here's an important concept that we discussed, and I think a couple of your council members had suggested they're big fans of making sure that the architecture in the city and particularly the building masses are better articulated than the ones that they have seen in many places. Here's what happens when you have a lot, when you have a block, such as the one that has been drawn on the upper left corner, and you give people a density or an FAR, people extrude that like a tub of butter. So if you have an FAR of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you extrude that for 4 stories. And then you have design guidelines, and the design guidelines come in and try to break that box and pre it up, right? But it's still a box. And that's what you're seeing in many of the cities, many of your neighboring cities. In fact, Ron will recognize the one at the in the right-hand corner, because that's a city that he used to work for before he joined Baldwin Park. So this we're trying to address this and then make it more contextual to the context that it is in. And here's that concept of contextual density. This is a project done by our partners in the Charette, Moeller & Polozoid, at South Pasadena Station. And what you see on the upper right-hand corner, the small graphic, is what the code would allow them to build, which is a 3-story building that is almost rectilinear, a block. And yes, they could break that block and create some open spaces, but it's still a block. But the context around this is a single-family residential neighborhood. So what they chose to do here is, instead of creating that block, they created a series of building types with frontages that are in sync with the context. So where the building meets the station, you have a different type of building. You have the brick building that is 3 stories, and where it's meeting the neighborhood in the back, you have a more residential type architecture that mimics. It's still 3 stories, but you couldn't tell that it's 3 stories, and it's sitting right across from a single-family residential neighborhood. So now compare this project to this, and it's completely different. This is a block scale extruded up 4 stories. This is that same type of building, but it's designed in a manner to be contextual. So you're providing units, but at the same time, you're responding to the context. And there are ways to do that. And this is a diagram in the code. We describe how to do that. You have a block, you divide it with streets and alleys, and then you place the different building types for different contexts. So if you have a main street, you can have a 3 or 4 story building, but on the side streets, you have a variety of different building types that create a more graceful response to the context. So instead of having this, which you see R40, you're breaking that box and creating individual elements that are responsive to the context. So with that, I will stop, and I appreciate the time and the opportunity to address the council and the Planning Commission, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Kaiser, for that wonderful presentation. Again, if you'd like to make comments, feel free to submit them in the chat box, or raise your hand, and we can go ahead and unmute you to provide comments.
Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Garcia.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ranguala, for that very thorough presentation. And I wanted to touch on three areas of interest. First, I wanted to ask you about any changes in density. And I wanted to ask you if you could highlight that for me. And then second, I guess I wanted to touch on any changes in terms of the design guidelines, any significant changes, because I think in the past that has definitely been a challenge for us. So if you could really highlight that for me, I would really appreciate that. And then third, for existing uses that are currently permitted, but perhaps being phased out by updates to the specific plan, you know, because maybe they're uses that we don't necessarily want to encourage today. If somebody came to the city and submitted an application, it's not a use that we would exactly want to encourage, but at the same time, if it's an existing use, my question is, what is your recommendation and how would we build that into the specific plan for allowing the existing businesses to make improvements to their business so that they don't become obsolete? But at the same time, it allows us to control and regulate, you know, those types of uses, again, because we don't want them to come into our city at this point in time. It's more about how do we support existing businesses so that they can thrive and they can compete in their industry. But, you know, at the same time, consider the planning aspects of this and what we want to create in our downtown. So could you address those three items for me?
Sure. Mayor, would you like me to do that now, or please let me know.
Yeah, you can go ahead and answer question by question.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Excellent questions, and I'm glad you're thinking along those lines, because all of them have been addressed, and I want to make sure that if I cannot, because of the format, that we can follow up with you and sit down with you and answer them to your satisfaction. But let me just introduce the concepts. In terms of existing users, the council can set up and the planning commission can set up the dial. If you want to be very aggressive, you can say, you know what, existing users, that's fine, no expansion allowed. Or you can be more lenient and, as you were suggesting, more accommodating. And as we have, because of the direction that we heard from the community, is to allow existing businesses as non-conforming users and to allow some moderate amount of expansion so that they can conduct their business. You know, if you have an existing business and they want to add a few square feet here or make some changes, that's not going to require them to comply with the new code. But if they're adding, for example, more than 50% of the value, then I think any reasonable code wants to take a look at it, because the intent is that they're non-conforming, that they ought to be amortized. And by that, I mean, whatever investment they are making or have made, they ought to be able to recoup that, but with the understanding that expansion year for this type of use is not something that is conducive for the long-term viability of this area. Now, there are some uses, and Ron, you might point out a few of them. You know, I don't know, typically boat sales and industrial uses and car lots, things that tend not to work in a downtown area are typically either discontinued or allowed with a higher threshold of review, such as a specific plan. So there might be some uses that were taken off, and here's a list of uses that we have. And as you can see, P and CUP. So P is permitted; those uses are permitted by right. CUP is those uses would be require a conditional use permit that would require a higher threshold of review. So they would have to come to the Planning Commission, City Council, present that plan of operation, because there are certain things that are associated with the operation that impact that have impacts that go beyond their property lines. For example, if you have an outdoor car lot, an outdoor car lot has most of its operation outdoors. If you're thinking about, the city as a corporation, the downtown as a corporation, and you as a city council and the planning commission are put in charge of the corporation of the downtown, which has what, I don't know, 300, 400, 500 million dollars worth of investment, then you're trying to protect the investment that you have within that lot, but also protect the investment around it, so that other parcels that are around it are not impacted in a negative manner, that you can still build whatever the plan calls for across from this lot without having impacts. So those type of uses are that have outdoor component require either higher threshold of review or are in many cases discontinued. Now, in terms of change in density, I think what we have done is we worked with within our team. We had architects who actually build projects. So they're not just urbanists and urban designers, but they're also architects. So what we have done is rather than work with numbers from your existing specific plan, we worked with what makes sense. What would the market build, and how best to tailor that to the different context. So for example, if you're right next to a single family residential neighborhood, a 60 units per acre density doesn't make sense. So in many cases you have that. So in those cases we have brought down the density. But if you're on Ramona, where you have a 200 feet wide threshold, and you're trying to enclose that and create a sense of enclosure, I think you want to encourage more production there. So the code allows for some leverage. They're all within the thresholds of building types, because there are certain building types that you can build. You can build a 5-story building on 4 stories over a concrete base in type 5. I think it's type 5 construction. But anything beyond that goes into steel. And when they're building steel, they want to go up not 5 to 6, but they want to go up 8 or 9 to recoup the investment they're making in steel. So we've actually taken all of those things into consideration when coming up with density parameters. Context, building types, market preferences, and community dialogue. So there are changes to density, and I think you can look at the 2 maps, and the staff would be happy to, we are happy to provide you that comparison following this meeting. And then in terms of design guidelines, as I mentioned earlier, design guidelines are just that, the guidelines, which means I don't have to follow them, the guidelines. And they continue the discretionary review at the Planning Commission and City Council. We like to have standards. Very few, very important, and we call them out. But there are some areas where discretion is warranted, and I think in those places we have design guidelines. And our organization for the design guidelines is slightly different than what you would see in the existing code. We pay a higher preference and a higher degree of importance on the public realm, and that is the design of the street, the design of the open spaces, and the design of the private frontages that define that street and that open space. And again, those guidelines are laid out in the document in that format. So it's not apples to apples for us to compare. It's just a different way of coding. I hope I answered your question. If there are follow-up, please let me know.
Yes, thank you. As far as the density, I think it would be helpful to, and I understand what you're saying about the context and the building types and compatibility of surrounding uses and properties. But I do want to better understand, and we do have a relatively new council. And so I do want to better understand currently what would be allowed by right, and then what changes are being proposed in this updated specific plan. Because I want to understand what a developer can build, you know, in any one of these areas in the downtown area by right or with a discretionary, you know, land use approval, because that's important to this council, I think. And I think that it would be important to highlight those changes and to make sure that, you know, we do approve the details, the specifics of what's being proposed here. And then second, as far as the design guidelines, I think it would also be nice to, you know, I think we have actually received some images of what, you know, some of the downtown, the designs could look like, but I want to know specifically what is being proposed in this plan, because again, it has been a challenge in the past, and I do appreciate all the work that you put into being thoughtful on the facades, on the setbacks, articulation, all of it. But I think because this is a relatively new council, I think it would be nice for all of us to receive that information and to have more detail than less. So Ron, I don't know if there could be a second, you know, meeting to receive that information. That would be helpful. And then those were just comments, but my last question, Mr. Rangwala, is what would you recommend? I liked what you said about the moderate improvements for existing non-conforming uses. So what would be the format to, you know, to review, to consider that? What would be your recommendation?
I was wondering, have you received the draft plan? Because a number of things that you're asking for are already called out in the draft plan.
Ron, did you circulate that?
Yeah, we've circulated out to the community and the council for a little over a month now.
And I can quickly walk you through. So if you have a copy, you can know where to look at these things. For example, the administration section of the plan of the code talks about nonconformity and their standards, and it breaks down when and how those would kick in and under what provision. So let me just quickly point that out to you. I think that would be useful. And the density and the design guidelines are all laid out as well for different sections. So it's all in the plan.
Kaiser?
I'm sorry.
One suggestion, if we could, just to provide some context, I think would really help, and I think settle some questions. Councilmember Garcia's question on density. Can you go to your presentation of showing the regulating plan, showing the difference in densities that are being proposed in the downtown?
Sure, I can. If you'll give me a moment, I just want to have Garcia look at this section. 1.2.c, non-conforming lots, uses and structures, intent, and then additions, repairs, maintenance, and then replacement of non-conforming structures. So all of these standards are called out. Again, this is a dial, so we can tune it up or tune it down. Right now, it's tuned down to allow this to happen gradually over a period of time, not immediately.
Okay, and since we're having the conversation, I see that in this plan, it says no non-conforming uses shall be expanded. And so that's my question is, how do we introduce the opportunity to allow existing non-conforming uses to where it makes sense to allow them to compete, to thrive in, current market conditions for their industry.
Right.
And according to this document, I'm seeing that, we're taking a more stringent approach. So I'm asking you, how could we have that conversation here on the council so we can really talk it through and be thoughtful about it? Because I think, as you pointed out, we have some mom and pop shops, or we have some smaller businesses that could use improvement, but they're not able to because of our specific plan and because they're not conforming use at this point. So I'm trying to get from you, what format would it be to take this section alone and to take it to a study session part 2?
Well, I think, you can give us direction on how you want. Again, it's a dial, and you need to. I would encourage you to read the whole section, because the very next section talks about additions, that a non-conforming building or structure may be added to, provided that addition of 50% or more of the floor area existing as of adoption of the downtown code. So you can expand up to 50%. Now, if you want to change that and allow for 100% expansion, that's it's no longer non-conforming. So you need to have a percentage if you're going to call it non-conforming. So where and how much you allow expansion is and what is reasonable. Because if you allow it 100%, then you're allowing that use to continue for perpetuity, because they can add as they choose and they can stay as non-conformity. If the intent is truly non-conformity, that it ought to go away, that in 5 years, 10 years, they need to look at another location other than downtown, then that is explicitly mentioned here. But if, for example, there's a use that you feel that belongs in downtown, then maybe we shouldn't make it non-conforming. Maybe we should allow it by right.
Yeah. Perfect example. Some of the the uses that were carried over in the use matrix in the existing downtown specific plan. Perfect example. Uses like auto and intense uses, your car washes, your drive-throughs, your drive-through uses. Are prohibited uses. And again, as the Kaiser has mentioned, those uses can be easily, again, they're non-conforming, and that they're prohibited because of it being a TOD specific plan. But it can easily be addressed by simply just allowing those uses by right, as Mr. Rangwala has mentioned. So those uses can be dialed down and taken out as prohibited, and then put in the use matrix as easy as just allowed by a CUP, whether it's an expansion of less than 50%, or a further intensification.
Okay, well, thank you for that information. I don't want to take up everybody's time.
No, not at all.
I do want us to be thoughtful about this as we review the specific plan update and, take the steps to approve. So I just want us to be fully informed, and, just to call out certain sections that I think it's timely. I've been part of specific plan updates since 2000. I've been part of, teams that have created prohibited uses, but where we are now is we do have existing uses, and rather than seeing them deteriorate, I would like to see them continue to survive and thrive, if possible, for a more vibrant downtown area. So that's where I just wanted to call out that section specifically, because I think it's one that we really have to be thoughtful about. And I thank you, Mr. Rangwala, for mentioning the 50%, because it provides some control on the expansion of it and doesn't necessarily allow the by right, which, you know, of course, there's a reason why we took the steps to make it prohibited. So anyway, it's a little bit of a conundrum, but, you know, I'll review that section, and then if at a later time, you know, I think it's important for us to have a specific conversation, then I'll bring it up to my council colleagues, as far as like a study session phase 2, perhaps, and perhaps include, you know, the planning commission if they are interested. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing to add. Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. One thing you mentioned about uses in the downtown, most of the uses, with the exceptions of the ones that I made note that are indicated in the use matrix as prohibited uses, and your car washes, your drive-throughs, and your auto-related uses such as, you know, auto mechanic, auto repair within the downtown. Most of the uses that you see in the downtown are being are essentially allowed. And what we noticed in the existing specific plan is that we consolidated some of the uses, made it easier to read, and also added uses that we've, and Ben can add more to that, uses that we've, that the specific plan promotes, like, for example, entertainment type uses. We've gotten uses such as a brew pub. We were a little more specific on the type of alcohol uses, still kept it in line with what's required as an entitlement, a discretionary entitlement, such as a CUP. So it does continue, as with the existing plan, to support those types of uses that attract, that you would find in a downtown. And most of all your uses, with the ones that I noted, are being supported in the existing downtown plan. So you're really not going to see, with the adoption of this plan, an automatic non-conforming situation for existing businesses within the downtown. It actually just kind of opens up for flexibility for those uses to exist in the downtown plan. So hopefully I was able to give you a little more context in addition to what Mr. Rangwala has provided.
So does any other council member have any questions?
One more item I wanted to address, Kaiser. So Kaiser's put up this slide, and Kaiser, you can give some greater detail. But in response to your comment, Councilmember Garcia, I'm glad that you asked that question. So the intensity, the existing intensity in the downtown is maxed out at 30 units per acre. And so when we first came on board, Ben and I were getting interest from housing developers wanting to do, interested in developing within the downtown, but the density, and Kaiser, you can speak more to that, 30 units per acre just doesn't pencil out for a downtown, especially when you have a major transit hub such as Metrolink. And so with this, and as I mentioned earlier on, with this SB2 grant, and then protecting our established neighborhoods, our single family neighborhoods, is to concentrate and be in line with what the state's been promoting and providing housing near transit and in your downtown. So what we've done here is evaluated the densities. And so you can see here in purple, which is the downtown core, at a maximum density of 60 units per acre. And then what it does is then moves out to 50 units per acre in the downtown core. And then in the downtown edge, a maximum of 40 units per acre. And Kaiser, if you wanted to speak any to that, but
yeah, I'll just add that you know, this is little bit of bias. We don't believe in density units per acre. Unfortunately, the planner side in us that wants to analyze things and analyze the impacts actually need those density unit numbers, because that's how we generate traffic, that's how we generate impacts, greenhouse gases, et cetera, et cetera. But what we are trying to create here is a form, and we're controlling the form. And I'll give you a quick example why density units per acre doesn't work, or FAR doesn't work. If I tell you an FAR and I give you an acre lot, on an acre lot, I can build on 1/8 of the lot and build an 8-story building, and on the same acre I can build a 1-story building. Both are allowed. Density is a very blunt tool. It's not a great tool for creating communities. So what we try to do is we try to create the form, and we try to address the form by calling out the heights that are allowed. So for example, in the core that Ron was talking about, we're allowing buildings to go up to 55 feet, provided there is buildings to go up to 45 feet with an addition of an additional story if they take that much of the story out from the back, where it meets the residential context, where it meets the local residential streets. So we're talking in terms of shaping that form with setbacks, with height, rather than the blunt tool units per acre. So what you have here in this plan is a combination. We've used both. We've used units per acre, but also tempered it with heights and setback to get the final form, and with frontages.
So with the 55-foot limit in some of these areas, are we looking at 5 stories? Like a 5-story building?
Yes, a 5-story building with actually, let me describe it this way. In the purple, you can have 4-story buildings, but that 4-story building can have a 5-story element along Ramona, for example, or along Main, provided that take comparable amount of space away from the back where it meets neighborhood. And this diagram explains that. So you can add an additional story to go up to 5, provided the story in the back is no longer 4, but it's 3, where it meets the neighborhood. So as to create that contextual density we're talking about, so as to not perpetuate that block building that we often see. So that's the core. Then aside from the core, the orange, as Ron was suggesting, you can build up to 3 stories, 35 feet. So along the corridor, you can build 3-story buildings with a 4-story element. So along, if I'm building, say for example, on this parcel, along Ramona on the north side, then that's colored orange, then I can build a 4-story building along Ramona, and my building needs to step back comparable amount in 2 stories in the back. And then going back to the yellow in the downtown edge, I can build up to 2 stories, 25 feet, with the provision to go up to 35 feet as you meet the residential context, and which is what is allowed in residential district. So it's a gradation, and it's a little more skillful and a little more articulate way of crafting building masses for different contexts, rather than saying units per acre, go at it. You often get block buildings.
Yeah, I get it. And I appreciate that you're incorporating like that transitional, height, I guess, is how I would describe it, right? Because you're trying to match the context of the surrounding properties, uses, neighborhood. My question to the council and to the planning commission is, what do you think about 5-story buildings in downtown? And that's why I wanted to ask about these specifics, because now is the time to have a conversation around these.
Yeah, and I kind of want to chime in. So I'm glad Councilmember Garcia brought up this point, right? And so my question was going to be regarding density, and something you mentioned was, you said something along the lines of market-friendly density, and to me that's kind of saying that's kind of density that the developer's going to want. And so, in my opinion, what the density the developer's going to want is going to be much more dense than what the community is going to want. And so, I guess before I continue, I did want to ask, what type of outreach did you do to the community, and how many people were you able to speak to?
We did a series of steps for outreach, starting with interviews of stakeholders, and these are stakeholders that staff identified as key players within the downtown, within the community. And I think it was about a dozen or maybe even 15 stakeholders that we interviewed one-on-one. In addition to that, we've had, as I mentioned, over 9 meetings over a 9-month period, which includes a 3-day charrette where we work with the community for 3 continuous days and met with them at 6 different meetings. So I would say most of those meetings were, I don't have the accurate log of how many people attended those meetings, Mayor, but I would say we had a good, healthy dialogue with the people that attended those meetings. Ron, you may want to add additional outreach efforts that in terms of notification and reaching out to property owners and businesses that you engaged in.
Yeah, thank you, Kaiser. Mr. Mayor, so great question. So we, ahead of time, when we first kicked off this endeavor, we knew that outreach was going to be really important. We also understood walking into this plan that historically, the Baldwin Park community, really low turnout. You can talk to several of our staff members that have done other projects not related to planning, but for example, public works. But we didn't let that sway us. We were also dealing with the pandemic at the same time. But we did an extensive outreach. Staff and I, planning staff, myself and the associate planner, mailed out more than 1,600 notices, letting them know of the stakeholder meetings, letting them know of the community charrette meetings. We also heavily advertised on the city's website and also social media, Instagram, Twitter, and all that was done, thankfully, with the help from Helen in our Parks and Rec department. We also invited key stakeholders, as Kaiser mentioned, our business community, also community groups. We try to get a hold of community groups, the school district. And so we did, I think, in my opinion, I think if it wasn't for COVID, we probably would have had a lower turnout. But because of COVID, it allowed people the flexibility of logging on through a Zoom community meeting. We did average, between 20 to 25 participants. But to answer your question in its entirety, we did do an extent amount of outreach. Perfect example, in preparation for the release of this draft document, all those resources were used: social media, Twitter, Instagram, our website, and then sending out 1,000+ notices well over a month in advance in preparation for this meeting. Between that time period of releasing the document, I did get less than 5 calls asking about the downtown specific plan. But that was pretty much it. So in its entirety, we did do an extensive amount of research. I mean, not research, but of outreach.
Yeah, and then you also reached out to community members that aren't in the downtown area. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Right. 'Cause- So the downtown area, it's not just, so to me, the downtown area belongs to everybody, right? Everybody wants the downtown area to thrive. And I think that regardless of who you talk to in the Baldwin Park community, we all want to be able to enjoy the downtown area, right? So that we can spend our dollars here, we can enjoy our city, and we don't have to travel too far. So I think the biggest concern of mine is the density portion, right? I think, we talked about how high our buildings are we're allowing them to get. And I know that when the Cesar Chavez Foundation talked about their affordable housing, they ended up agreeing to reducing a level because we thought it was too high, right? And I think that's not just one of my concerns, but I think that's a concern for a lot of the community, right? We're a pretty unique town, and our downtown is very specific to us. And so one of the biggest concerns is that once we start building up, we're creating this major density, and it kind of takes away from what Baldwin Park is. And I think that there's ways where we can create a downtown that's usable, walkable, and that has a right amount of density so that it thrives and that there's a good circulation in that area.
Yeah. So good point. The existing specific plan allows a building height. For example, the Cesar Chavez Foundation project, they built that project under the existing conditions of the current specific plan at a maximum height of 50 feet. It doesn't provide that contextual articulation, as Kaiser has mentioned, where you have your higher stories, and then it cuts back out, especially when you transition to single family. The current specific plan is 50 feet, 30 units per acre. The one thing that I want to make note, and I'm glad that Councilmember Garcia made note of it, and I want to circle back to that because this is all interrelated, is the by right. One thing about the Cesar Chavez Foundation is, and this is state law, there's no way working around state law. But if you all recall the project for the Senior Housing Foundation, they could check off all those boxes per state law and the density that they were requesting, because they're near transit allows them by right without a discretionary approval. So the Planning Commission can't see it, the City Council can't see it for a vote. In that scenario, I think in good faith effort, they work with the city. They wanted to present to the city what they were proposing. But for example, Cesar Chavez, that is most likely going to be a by right based on state law, and then meeting the density that allows them to move forward with a non-discretionary approval. They can simply walk into the city hall, submit to the building department. We cannot require parking. That's the other thing too. State law does prohibit cities from requiring additional parking, especially because it's near transit. This plan, if it's not a project that's related to 100% affordable, does allow for discretionary review, does allow for Planning Commission review. And then to take it a step further, with the adoption of this plan, what this plan does is it makes a recommendation for the city to move forward with requesting for service for architectural consulting services to assist the city and city staff to review projects that come through the downtown to make sure that we're getting quality architecture, quality design in line with what the plan is promoting. And Kaiser, you could speak a little more to that, but
I just want to provide a clarification. Maybe I confused the issue, because I want to make sure that everybody understands that the purple area is where 4-story buildings are allowed. And the 5th story is just an element, which means that a small portion of that building, not the entire building. So when you say a 5-story building, no, we're not talking about that. We're actually talking about a 5th-story element, provided a similar element is taken down from the back to provide a contextual mass. And that's only happening on 4 corners of your downtown. Everywhere else, you're seeing a declension. You're seeing a 3-story building, and even lower than that, 2 stories as it goes back, which is lower than the highest, tallest building that you have currently in the downtown, which is a 4-story building. So we are actually bringing down the density. We're very much aware that this needs to be uniquely Baldwin Park, and we understand your concern about density and the impacts of the density, but there are also positive impacts that density allows you to address. And by the way, if traffic is your concern, you can do nothing and traffic will get worse. I can almost guarantee that, because the neighboring cities are building, and your streets are not blocked at the boundaries. This is true traffic, so your traffic will get worse. It's how are you using these projects to make a bad situation from getting worse and improving it? And that's what the density allows you to do, is to create a mixed-use environment that doesn't primarily rely on the automobile. It's transit-oriented. It provides the housing unit that you have a legal obligation, not a moral, a legal obligation. You have to provide those 2,000 units. If not here, find somewhere else in your city. So that is something that you need to keep in mind when you skirt away from the term density, because it's required. And in addition to that, your property and sales tax that you're generating, you're making retail and transit both viable by providing. So it's a very limited area that we're talking about, a 5-story element. For the most part, your downtown is going to be 2 and 3 stories.
Yeah. So the way we map, So the way we map downtown here, it looks pretty big, but I think for the most of us, downtown really ends at the corner of Baldwin Park Boulevard, and at most at the corner of the Metrolink, and then everything else beyond that is really residential, right? And I know that we have to build housing, of course we do by law, but I think we've just had this discussion, right, where Baldwin Park hasn't really seen a lot of stuff, and then to go and take the finite amount of space that we have for the downtown area and densify it with housing, it's to me it's not something that I'm the most in support of. I know that we have to build housing, and I think that we have to get creative with that, right? Instead of just loosening the density of what developers are going to be able to build in here. I think that is I know residents aren't always the most proactive and don't get involved in the meetings, even if we invite them to. But I know that is a concern that they do feel strongly about, right? And so another one is we talked about I think you mentioned building housing is going to help our kind of fight off the homeless and housing issues. But if we're building densified housing in a downtown area by the Metrolink, what's it going to come out to? And are we considering the demographics and medium incomes of our families here in the city?
Yes and yes.
A couple of questions, Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Damian.
So for the outreach, Ron, who's in charge of doing the outreach? Is it Mr. Rangwala or is it city staff?
Oh no, it's in partnership with the consultant, but 99% is city staff.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then, so is according to what I'm seeing here is you have the downtown core, the corridor, and the edge. So is this plan proposing that we build 2,062 units within this downtown area?
So there's a couple things. So based on the intensity of the downtown plan and what has been looked at, has the intensity to build a little over what the state is requiring us to accommodate of 1,996 units.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So within this downtown area has the potential for 2,000 plus units, yes.
So we have a leakage in restaurants, clothing. We have a leakage in specialty home furnishings and all of that. We really don't have a walkable downtown where we could say, let's go and spend, sales tax dollars in downtown. And so basically what we're proposing is that we bring in and satisfy those 1,996 units that are required to be built by 2029 in the downtown corridor?
Well, so this is Kaiser, if you can speak to that, but this is a long term. So this is a specific plan, as Kaiser mentioned. This is 30, 40, 50 years out. The requirement that we have by state law is that we have to plan for the accommodation of 1,996 units. And so by moving forward with this plan allows us to comply with those number of units required by the state. And again, when we first took this endeavor and looking at the downtown and then also looking at the existing downtown specific plan at a maximum of 30 units per acre, and in line with what the state is supporting and building housing near transit, especially because Baldwin Park does have a Metrolink station, is you want to build near transit. You want to put your housing near transit. By building this housing does not remove the ability to be able to attract your restaurants, your retail uses, because it is mixed use. You do allow for ground floor retail uses. So that doesn't go away. Walkability, perfect example. What you see out there under construction right now, and the Public Works Director can speak more to it, is the downtown beautification. That is all a contributor towards the main goal of creating a walkable downtown. So hopefully hopefully I was able to answer your question. And Kaiser, if you want to.
So a mixed use, I mean, the mixed use in downtown, I'm not opposed to that. But have we explored building and satisfying the 1,996 units that we have to build in other parts of the city instead of just in downtown? I mean, because that's a lot of units for downtown. I mean, where's parking going to be?
So, Ron,
Yeah.
Councilman Dem, can I address
Yeah.
that, please?
Sure, go ahead.
I understand your concern, and I'm with you 100%. I don't think it's the intent that all of that capacity be met in the downtown area. And what the state is looking for is to for the city not to build, because you're not in the building business. You're not in building the you're a city government. You're not a developer. But what the state wants to do is they want to see a document, they want to see a plan, they want to see a code that would allow a capacity for that to be built. Now, what's interesting about this downtown is you're incredibly rich in the fabric, where you have small lots, large lots, multiple ownership. The plan that we are sharing with you today has a maximum build out of 2,000 units. And that's over maybe even 20 years, perhaps 50 years, maybe not in our lifetime. It's going to be built incrementally. It's not going to be built overnight. I haven't run the numbers, we can, but it's only a small percentage over what's currently allowed. Your current specific plan also allows units. And in this case, I think we've just kind of tweaked it in some places to create more contextual mass and allowed for some places to be higher because they are more intense corners of your downtown, where we hope transit retail will function better. But all of the units that we're talking about, the 2,000 units, they're going to be built over a period of 50 to 100 years. What the state is requiring is for you to show in your code the ability to build 2,000 units. Not all of them are in downtown. Your housing consultant in a couple of weeks is going to share how many of those can be projected to be in the downtown area and how many could be elsewhere in the city. The housing element is going to show you that. So yes, but I would venture to say they're gonna come back and see a good portion of that is going to be in the downtown because that's where your parcels are the largest. That's where your opportunities are the largest. But they're also going to look at other corridors. They're going to look at sites along the freeway. When you look at the city as a whole, there aren't that many areas, sir, where you can locate high density housing. and I think the location where you want to locate it is where you have transit, where you have some of your amenities, where you have your infrastructure, and that happens to be the downtown. So I wouldn't be surprised if the housing element comes back and says, you know, a good portion of these are going to be in the downtown, but they're going to look at the entire city, and the distribution would be citywide of those 2,000 units in the next 8 years. So there are two different things happening. 2,000 units as recommended by the state, which you have to provide, which is going to be citywide, and then 2,000 units capacity that is projected in your downtown specific plan that can occur over a period of 20 to 50 years. And it's going to be that way because you have multiple ownership. And none of these people are selling their parcels and rebuilding downtown anytime soon. You have 2 or 3 opportunities in your downtown area that's going to materialize in the next 5 to 8 years. And I think that will help your housing element. But other than that, all of the other sites, it's going to take a long, long time.
Thank you for that, Kaiser. You are correct. And as I mentioned earlier on, we are going to have a joint study session on the housing element document. And Kaiser is correct that most of the units to meet their state's RHNA is within the downtown. If some of those units get shaved off in the downtown, the reality is that we're most likely going to have to start from square one to evaluate and consider other areas of the city for rezone and density and to densify other areas. And again, as I mentioned earlier on with the approach of the downtown, this downtown specific plan is the protection of your established neighborhoods, especially because it's largely made up of single family residential. Not sure if you want to also just kind of shed light. I've had this conversation with some of the council members. Is the state passed ADU law, and essentially you can have 3 units on any single family lot. You can convert part of your single family home into a junior accessory dwelling unit, along with the existing dwelling unit, primary unit, and then build either attached or a detached ADU. And that's state law. And so we've definitely seen an increase there, but to make an effort in protecting the established neighborhoods, the planning for growth within the downtown made much more sense than considering intensifying our established neighborhoods.
So in a sense, you don't have to build these 2,000 units in downtown. You just have to send this plan to RHNA to let them know that we have the capability of building these 2,000 plus units in our downtown area, have it in our plan to satisfy their requirement.
Yes,
You're
Council-
absolutely 100% correct.
And
That's
so,
correct.
and so if we were to adopt this plan, can any modifications be made at a later time?
The answer is yes, but once we've identified the sites, once we've identified those sites for development, the state makes note of it. We will have to keep an inventory. So for example, if we make modifications, say, well, we don't want, for example, development to occur on this site, state law requires us to find another site that we are to redistribute those units elsewhere in the city. So it is going to require a different exercise to do that, but yes, you are correct.
So then all of these sites that are in this downtown specific plan have already been identified for proposed development of housing. And if at any point in time we decide we don't want housing in that specific parcel, then we have to send it to the state and let them know that we made a modification, and we would have had to find a separate parcel for them to be able to build those units that we're going to build initially, correct?
Can I answer that, Ron?
Sure, go ahead, Kaiser.
Councilor Damien, you're correct. I would add a point of clarification that not all of the sites are allocated for growth. We selected the sites based on feedback that we received from the community during our meetings, and the sites that were identified by staff and various elected members and the planning commissioners. So those are the sites that are identified for redevelopment potential. These are vacant sites, these are sites that potentially may be underutilized, or these are sites where developers, individual property owners have expressed interest to build in the near future. So not all of the sites are identified, only select number of sites have been identified as potential for redevelopment.
And the sites that you selected for possible development of housing are included in this downtown 145-page report?
Yes, sir.
I can review that, okay.
Yeah, Kaiser.
But I also want to add a clarification so that you get the whole picture. I'm sorry, Ron, I didn't mean to speak over you. While what I said is true, that doesn't mean that any of the parcels that were not identified cannot come forth with a development proposal. They have every right to come forth and build for what the code would allow them. So we have only selected a handful of sites that we know are potentials, but when we code and we prepare a plan, the code is for the entire downtown area. So for example, where you're seeing some of the apartment buildings north of Morgan Park, we're not proposing any changes. We're actually maintaining status quo. What is there can remain, but they have every right, just as other parcels, to come up for redevelopment. But the capacity there, the density there is exactly what they have currently. We're not changing that. It's 2 or 3 stories. In that case, it can be 2 stories as is. So for most of your downtown, the density is going to remain as is. There are only select parcels that we've identified in the downtown area for redevelopment. But other parcels can come forth, and I wanted to make that clarification.
Yeah. And Kaiser, thank you for making that clarification. So some of those parcels, for example, just to give a little more detail, the slide that you showed with the white buildings identified. So those sites, in working with the consultant, we went over what's in the pipeline, what's of interest in the downtown. For example, the Retirement Housing Foundation across the street from the Metrolink, that was identified. You can see that there on Central. So we identified that. That's coming. That's happening. And then the other that we had the council had a study session which is the Cesar Chavez. That is more likely that's going to turn over because the interest is there, and they control the site. The other location is the Water District building. That is another potential site that was identified for likely to turn over in the near future. The other site, for example, Rome, across the street from City Hall, that site, because we've had extensive discussions, we've been working with Rome for quite a while, and based on what their plan is proposed. So we identified that in the plan to differentiate what is coming in the near future and then long term. So hopefully that provides a little more clarity.
So I just wanted to add, so I know that even if we adopt this plan, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But then we're talking about, so let's say at the Park Plaza, let's say the current owner and property manager want to add a building that's commercial, but that's not what's intended in the downtown plan. We're planning for heavy density housing there.
No, they can propose, Kaiser, if you will.
I'm so glad you asked that, Mayor. Thank you for that question, because it allows us an opportunity to clarify an additional point. What you see here in the plan, this rendering, it's an illustrative plan. It's one of hundreds of possible outcomes that we are suggesting. The document that I think we need to focus on is the legal document, and that's the regulating plan. And that's this document. So this document actually controls what gets built where. So for example, if this guy wants to come in Park Plaza and rebuild, what can he rebuild? Well, he can rebuild housing at a much lower density, kind of the density that you already have in the neighborhood for about more than half his parcel. He has to put a public open space, and then for a corner lot here, he can build that 4-story building with a 5th story and 3rd story element, as we had described earlier. And then on the rest of the parcel, he can build a corridor building that would be essentially a 3-story building with a 2-story element and a 4-story element along Ramona.
So if you can imagine the corner of, the Bank of America building right on the corner. So let's say that were to get redeveloped. Potentially Bank of America could be on the ground floor, and you can have office space, residential units above as a mixed use building at that corner within that shopping center.
And then, so how does this affect? So if we allow for this much density, and then a developer comes in, and then we don't agree with it, then at that point, I don't think we have much say, right? Because we've allowed for it in the downtown specific plan.
Well, Kaiser, if you want.
Go ahead, bro. Please go ahead.
So there is a discretionary approval. Again, as I mentioned, it's really important. There's 2 distinctions, not to mix them up, is when you have 100% affordable because of state density bonus laws, when you're close to transit, and that's what's unique about the downtown and Baldwin Park, is if they're able to check all those boxes, we have to allow it by right. But for example, if you get a market rate housing developer to come in, there is some discretion there because it is going to require discretionary approval based on a lot of the design considerations that Kaiser was discussing, and based on the intensity. There is going to be some discretionary review.
Mayor, I have a question, follow up to that. So Ron, just to be more specific, you mentioned Bank of America, the corner. And if I'm looking at this correctly, is it in the purple zone?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
That is correct, yeah.
So in the purple zone, a developer could come in and propose a project that is up to 55 feet with a certain percentage of that as not a floor, but excessive space, I guess, or excess space. And the project could be up to 60 units per acre in that site. And would that be by right, or would that require discretionary review?
No, that would require discretionary review by the Planning Commission, unless appealed to the City Council. And with that requires a review, again, as I mentioned, moving past this plan is to then do an RFP for a town planner to assist staff in review of projects within the downtown to make sure that we're getting quality architecture, quality design in conformance with the downtown specific plan. Kaiser?
So what would be the discretionary review exactly for that? Let's say in that scenario.
Kaiser, did you want to mention? I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
I was just going to add a couple of things. One, I think if you want to build a portion of that, it would start with the subdivision process. Because right now that parcel, and I'd have to take a look at the geometry of that parcel, but I think that parcel is, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the parcel. It's an outlot within a larger shopping center. So if you're just developing this parcel, then you need to show how the rest of that development is going to function, because right now it's all connected.
Right.
So we have suggested in the plan one possible outcome. If you want to change that, fine. There's a process. Come and change it, but you need to show how that fits within the larger parcel, within the larger setting, so that when you're building the bank building, you show in a subdivision where the rest of the parcels are, because you're reconfiguring how this site functions. This site functions as a shopping center. The parking is shared, the driveways are shared. I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead, Kaiser. There must have been some feedback.
Oh, okay. So that needs to happen. Now we've heard, and I think this would be very helpful direction to us. We've heard a lot of talk about excessive density and the not being appropriate. I think it would be helpful for us because we've worked with the community and worked with many members who have participated in this open participatory process for the last 9 months. And at every step, we brought this for your review, for your recognition, and we received direction saying, yeah, that's fine, go ahead. But tonight we're hearing some pushback on the density. So I think those that are pushing back, if they can provide a direction to us, what is acceptable density? What is a concern? Is a concern the 5th story element? Because we can take that away. We can allow a 4-story element. Is a concern the 4th story element? Or would you like to see everything in the downtown be just 3 stories? Give us some specific direction so we can make this edit and bring you the final plan, because that would be helpful conclusion of this evening's meeting to have some direction from the council, from the entire council, about what you would like to see in this downtown plan.
Well, I would suggest that we have a second meeting. First of all, to your point, we want to have the entire council present. And of course, the Planning Commission, if they want to take the time, I think it would be appropriate. But, you know, I know that we want to be respectful of people's time. But I would certainly, that would be my recommendation, is to have a second phase of this meeting so that we're all present and we're getting the specifics. I think what we have received to this point is a higher level presentation. And I think we have had, there has been alignment. I think that where we want to be very thoughtful, and you have clearly been very thoughtful, Kaiser, and so have you, Ron. But I think as far as the City Council and the Planning Commission, we want to be very thoughtful and have a conversation around, you know, what makes sense for us, and then develop consensus there. And like, for example, you know, I guess I don't want to belabor, but I guess my question on the Bank of America scenario is, let's say those 4 parcels at the corner were combined and by a developer who is proposing a mixed-use project, and they were looking at a 4-story, you know, condominium with, I guess, up to 60 units per acre, and then a commercial on the bottom. So what discretionary actions would be required if we were to move forward with what is being proposed tonight? What would the discretionary actions be from the Planning Commission and the City Council if a project was proposed like that? Would it be, what would that be exactly? CUP or?
It would be, it would certainly, as Ron was mentioning, it would be a site plan application, and it would be reviewed for design and spatial concerns by a town architect. So you have an architect reviewing another architect's work and providing feedback because they have the right skill sets. And then those comments would appear before Planning Commission through a site plan review. I would imagine it would proceed to the council for their review and approval. So that discretionary review is still there. It's not a CUP. The CUP is related to a use, conditional use. In this case, the bank use, council member, would be an allowed use. So it would not trigger a CUP.
Yeah.
But
Right.
if you wanted to put a car lot there, then that might trigger a CUP.
So
So
then
the-
what I'm hearing then is
So,
that it's basically a design review and a site plan review. And that's a discretionary action. So, I'm very much in favor of having housing, and I'm in favor of having, some density in our downtown. I'm comfortable with the 3-story still based on what existing structures. And, I don't want to come across as being anti-development in any way. I have definitely, I've worked for a developer, and I've been very friendly to the development community as a planning commissioner and a council member. So I don't want to come across as being anti-development or anti-density or anti-housing in the downtown area. I believe in mixed uses that all create a synergy, that create a walkable downtown. But for me, I think I would feel comfortable creating a baseline of like a 3-story structure, and then allowing for discretionary beyond that. So creating a range of like a baseline, and then what could be allowed with the discretionary action and review. This way, it's just a little bit more in the city council and the planning commission's control as to what is actually created. So that's my comment. That's my those are my recommendations, and I would recommend that we have a second study session to this, because I want to also mention to my colleagues on the council that this document, the specific plan, it's usually updated every 10 years, between 5 and 10 years. And it is basically like a roadmap for what is allowed in our downtown area. So if we do move to approve this document, we really want to make sure that we're comfortable with all the details. And speaking of that, Ron, I looked through my emails and I don't have the document. So can you resend it to me, please?
sure, no
So that
problem.
I can, yeah. And maybe what we can do too is for the second meeting, the follow-up meeting, we can recirculate that to everybody just so that it's fresh. It's at everybody's fingertips. But that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. Just to go back on your discretionary comment. So the discretionary action is not going to be any different from the way that projects get reviewed and approved now. The only added, the really nice thing about this plan is involving a town designer to assist staff in reviewing the architecture and site plan, as Kaiser mentioned, as part of that review process internally, prior to moving forward to sending it to the Planning Commission for their final review and approval, because we do have to obviously have environmental review that has to get certified by the approving body, that being the Planning Commission. And if the project, and it allows the Planning Commission to give their comments on the project, and if for some reason it does get denied, the developer has the ability to appeal that to council for further review. But the discretionary process, not anything different from how we're processing projects at the moment. So we're not changing any of that. The discretionary there is that it requires one, as mentioned by Kaiser, is a subdivision. So subdivision does require a discretionary action approved by the Planning Commission for their approval. We just took 2 housing projects to the Planning Commission for approval the other couple weeks ago. It'll move forward in that same process.
I would agree with you, Ron, that the process doesn't change, but based on the project, the request, the application does. So let me give you an example. if a developer comes in today proposing a market rate project based on this specific plan as it stands, allows for 30 units per acre. But if, let's say, they were requesting 50 units per acre, would that change what the application and what they're specifically requesting in order to develop that project?
No, so the existing specific plan, I can't go over the 30 units per acre unless, and it would still require discretionary approval. It's not allowed by right, but they have to comply with the specific plan at 30 units per acre. They couldn't come in and say, we want to do more than what's allowed in the specific plan. That right there requires a specific plan amendment to increase the density allowed within the specific plan, which is what we're doing in this specific plan, is recommending to the higher density. But no developer would be able to come in and propose a higher density than what's allowed in the specific plan.
Okay, so that answers the question then, because if a developer comes in saying, I want to develop 30 units, then that's allowed. And, they would go through the process. If a developer today were to come in and say, I want to develop 40 units, that's not allowed. Why? Because the city has basically said, we don't allow that. That's my point. That's my point. So.
Yeah, so in the existing specific plan, for example, we're calling out in the core 60 units per acre. They would not be able to come in and propose 70. They would have to be within the density allowed to propose an application, unless they submitted a specific plan amendment. Again, because applicants do have that right to submit an application, whether the council or planning commission would be in favor of it or not, or staff recommend that the city not move forward with an increase in density.
And that's what we're talking about here is, do we want to increase it by the double the density, right? 30 units as it stands today to 60 units as it's proposed in the update of the specific plan. And so that is important for us to consider and to talk about, and even perhaps to look at projects that would have, like, let's say 40 units per acre. What does that kind of project look like versus 60? What does that kind of project look like? Yeah. I think that would help, again, just to facilitate a thoughtful conversation on the council with the three of us, but in it, with the colleagues who are not present today, and the planning commission as well.
Yeah, and just a reminder, we went thoroughly in our charrette of what those building types look like, of what 50 units, what a 50 unit per acre, what a 50 unit density building would look like, 60 units, and we did do that. So I just want to be clear that we did present those types during the charrette in order to get a direction to move forward with the creation of this document.
Yes, and I do remember that was presented, but as part of, we went from a higher level conversation. Oh, this is what this looks like. Oh, this is what this could be. Now we're narrowing it down. Now we're creating more parameters within our specific plan. And so, it doesn't hurt, if we're going to be having the conversation, to include what the visuals could be. And I do remember that Kaiser did a great job of showing, density and how it can be masked, and how it can be presented in a way where it's not, a mass, it's not a rectangular box. But now that we're talking specifics, it'd be nice to say, oh, this is an example of what that could look like. I don't know, do my council colleagues disagree? I'm just trying to like match the details of the specific plan with some visuals to help facilitate. So again, those are just recommendations.
Mayor, if I may?
Can I add a point of clarification, just because I think it's important to understand this final detail. We're not calling out densities. It's just used for calculating impacts. If you see the regulating plan, it's suggesting districts. And if you see the downtown core and the standards, it's suggesting height, building height. But for the calculation purposes, we have to include density parameters. So a density of 60 units per acre, 50 units per acre, you ask an average person saying, how tall is that? Well, it ranges, it depends. And that's a true answer. It can be 5 stories, it can be 2 stories. If you pack the ground, or 2 or 3 stories, if you pack it all the way through. So what we're trying to get at is the building form, which is what people see. The visual impact of a density is a height that people see. And that's what we are regulating. And we have included sections as well as diagrams that demonstrate what that building could potentially look like. Now, if you have concerns with the final heights, we can moderate that, give us some direction there. If from what I'm hearing, you said you're comfortable with 3 stories, and that's what you would like to see in the downtown. I think that's good direction for us, because that tells us where to pin this. Density numbers don't mean a whole lot, because they could vary, again, how you use your site. So I'm trying to get some clarification on how to craft this code so it meets your intent, it meets your vision, it meets your direction.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I think 3 stories is a reasonable amount, especially for our city. I think it's a good start. Kind of go from there. And I think, I think the pictures that we're seeing of what downtown could be, I think are great. I like the idea of trees everywhere and there's shade, and it's going to help fight off urban heat island effect. And it makes it walkable, right? It's going to make it a place where people want to engage and hang around. So I think it's beneficial for all of us. I think it's going to be beneficial for in the long-term financials of the city. So I think 3 stories are fine, and I think we should maybe consider lowering the density. I think 60 might be too much. And then, we are missing 2 council members, so I think we would want to maybe have them in on the next one and then we can approve. But I think right now we're throwing out ideas, and I think that's viable.
Yeah, Mayor, and I agree with you and Councilmember Garcia. I think that it would be best for us to discuss it as an entire council, as well as the planning commissioners if they want to join. But the fact that we're missing 2, I think it would be best if we're going to see any modifications that we want to make before we make this adoption. I think that it would be best that we bring it back. We have everything in front of us and the entire council is present.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I think we've gotten good direction on the density and heights from the members present, and I think we can put together a little bit of a presentation, charrette, show some examples, looking at a little lower threshold on these densities and heights. So I think we got good direction to come back to you and hopefully present it in a way we can quickly ascertain exactly where the council wants to go. But thank you.
Yeah, and I think so far it's a good sign that we're the 3 of us are in consensus, right? So I think it's a good conversation. I think it's a good start. Once we get the other 2 council members in here, I think they can share their opinions and see where they stand. But,
yes.
But I think we might be okay starting there. Okay, so I think, is that Ben, clear enough direction for today?
Yes, Mayor and City Council, thank you. That is clear direction. Also wanted to, if there's any further direction on open space or areas designated for potential plazas, that would be another theme. And also, there has been some discussion about the drive-throughs in general. As the council knows, they are not allowed in the current, and they're not contemplated to be allowed in the proposed new updated specific plan. But if there's any comments related to drive-throughs, we'd want to hear that. We can also carry over that discussion to, since we're going to have another discussion, we can carry that over to the next one, but just food for thought.
Yeah, and I think the drive-throughs is another one, right? And I know that we want to try to tend to stay away from car usage and drive-throughs. And so, you know, I know that council has discussed it before, and I think the idea before by considering the drive-throughs is that we could potentially bring in, you know, alternatives that we don't already have in the city, creating a more diverse downtown, right? So I think one of the biggest issues with our downtown is that our anchor stores are grocery stores. And so I don't think those grocery stores are going to leave anytime soon. And I also don't think anybody's going to walk to the grocery store anytime soon, especially since you don't get bags anymore, right? So, so you know, it's trying to find I think it's trying to find a creative way to entice some sort of anchor so that we can get the flow into the downtown and kind of build around that, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so something to keep in mind, and I think that'll be a good discussion as well for the whole council to have in the next study session.
Mayor, maybe we can have that. Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember?
Okay, sorry about that. Maybe we can have that conversation around the non-conforming uses, and we can revisit the drive-throughs and maybe, you know.
Kind of cut off.
Yeah, I think
she might have cut off, huh?
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. There you are.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just suggesting that maybe we can take up the conversation about non-conforming uses also. You know, that would be part of the study session, is to talk about the density, the height, and then non-conforming uses perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to see things. How can we use that to the city's advantage so that we can stay involved in how downtown kind of flourishes, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind. And then maybe we can kind of focus in a little bit more on those type of usages at the next study session.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Before we move on, Kaiser, based on the direction that we've received, just based on how far we've moved along with the plan, and looking at density and looking at height, and also park space. I think the non-conforming thing, that's something that's easy, that can be modified in the plan, but based on your assessment and our tight budget for this project, since we're at the tail end of it, as far as timing and structural changes to the plan, do you see significant? Is it large, or is it or can it be doable?
Oh, it's always doable. It requires a significant amount of work, because we have to go back and redo the vision, redo the drawings, redo the plans, and it, you know, a change here precipitates all throughout the document. So it's actually creating a completely new draft. So it's going to have some budget implications.
Yeah, thank you for.
Here's what I'm hearing. You know, I think that what the consensus that I heard was that there are 3 council members and we need to hear from 5, but the general direction from the 3 that we are hearing today is that 3 stories is what they would like to see as a starting point within the downtown. They would like to have some added discussion about non-conforming uses, and they would like to allow drive-throughs. So those 3 points.
A limited amount of drive-throughs, I think we should specify. Very limited, if possible.
Unlimited?
Very limited.
Oh, okay. Limited.
Hey, down a notch, Ron.
The other way to think about this, Mayor, would be to maybe, you know, you can create some areas outside your core. So you could think about the core being more walkable, where you promote walking and allow the outer perimeters, such as, you know, the Starbucks or Baldwin Park. So the outer skirts of the downtown may allow drive-throughs, but the inner core is select area within the core. You may want to restrict those type of uses. So that's a thought about geographically limiting it. But I don't know how else you limit it. You allow it one place, you have to allow it in comparable districts elsewhere.
Yeah,
Thank you, Kaiser. So with that said, I just want to advise the city council that, you know, based on this clear direction, is going to require a significant amount of work, essentially, probably as Kaiser mentioned, starting from the beginning, to really look at these. This is going to require community meetings to do that. We are in a very limited budget. This coincided with the housing element, which we needed a housing element adopted and approved by the city by October 15th of this year. Because of these changes, these significant changes, and further study sessions for discussion, keep in mind that I just want to put it out there that keep in mind that we will not have an approved, adopted housing element as required by the state. There are some significant consequences for not having an approved housing element, because this downtown specific plan coincided with the housing element. Just a couple of things that I just wanted to know. One consequence that the state can come down on the city is removal of any the ability for the city to apply for any further grant funding. The second one is removal of any existing grant funding the city has received. And then third, the state attorney general could impose fines not to exceed $600,000. So there are some. This was reported in our housing element update progress reports to the council. But again, and lastly, we'll require negotiation with our consultants, not only the downtown specific plan consultant, but also our housing element. These are grant funded, and we're required to produce a document. But because of the additional time, I just want the council to be aware that there are some consequences with these changes, especially given the limited budget and the grant funds that we did receive from the state to see this project through. But anyways, I just wanted to advise the council on that, and we'll follow up further with the status at a later time.
Ron, can you walk us through and help us understand why do we start from the ground up at this point?
I think Kaiser can share a little more on how the effect of looking at density, because the densities that were proposed, and again, looking at our existing downtown and setting those densities, and then working alongside with our housing element consultant, have drafted a document that analyzes those densities to support meeting the RHNA numbers. So going from 5 stories to 3 stories, and right now we're not getting clear direction on what densities the council is comfortable with, has an effect on how the buildings are designed. And Kaiser, you can give a little more specificity on that, on how that impacts the exist
right.
what we've drafted so far.
Right. I don't think it's recreating the entire document, but there are specific sections in the document that make reference to building heights, and there are specific diagrams in the document that make reference to building height and density. And as Ron was mentioning, there is environmental documentation that is underway that will have to be reassessed. Although that's probably good news for them, because they're now analyzing fewer impacts than more. But nevertheless, they have to make those edits and those changes. So all of these things, they precipitate in throughout the document, and we have to go in and surgically make those changes throughout the document. So assuming that, once we get direction from the 5 members of the council at the next meeting, we will start that work. Whenever that next meeting happens, we'll start surgically amending the entire draft document to make it consistent throughout, because you don't want to amend the code when the plan's talking about one thing. That needs to be consistent throughout. The infrastructure, the impacts all need to be consistent and measured for whatever the council gives direction on.
Great. So Ron,
Thank you, Kaiser.
how soon can we plan the next meeting?
I think it's too early to say. There's a considerable amount of work that needs to be done that I need to coordinate with the consultant, and then also go over our budget. We have a finite budget, and this movement is going to cause for council consideration to approve an amendment to the scope of services. So
one thing, Mayor and Council, we could look at, I don't want to make any
Yeah.
promises, is we have this 2 weeks, we have another session on the housing element. Since we're already impacting that discussion with this discussion, maybe we can fit in this discussion about density, these other things, and get that done, and then shorten or even remove the housing element discussion, because it's going to impact it anyway. So let us look at that, and then we'll get back to the council.
thank you. Good point, Ben.
Yeah, Ron?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Damian. I have a couple questions for you. So were the intentions of this joint council meeting for us to adopt this plan tonight?
No. This is the draft document that we've presented to you in preparation, because as Kaiser mentioned, the environmental documentation is in process. And so that takes a considerable amount of time. We were looking for adoption before Planning Commission and Council going in August. So tonight was just to show you the draft of the plan, which mostly entirely consisted of what we presented to the community and was provided direction at that point. So we were hoping that if there was any minor, not major structural changes that we could make that would allow us to continue in that process for adoption in August. But what was not requesting for you guys to make a motion. It was more just to get some direction on any minor modifications to the plan since we released it a little over a month ago.
Yeah, so I was under the impression of that as well. So with that being said, since we really haven't said, exactly what modifications we want to make other than, the 5-story to maybe 4 or 3 stories. We just basically requested we want the other council members here so that we can decide, if we want to make modifications, what type. So what concerns me is that now we may be going over budget and have to, pay for that. But wasn't the purpose of this meeting for us to have any type of modifications made?
The modifications made because we did some extent, we held community meetings, as Kaiser mentioned. We went through thorough discussions with businesses within the downtown, major business owners such as the shopping centers and community members during the charrette. We were not anticipating significant structural changes like a density. I think height as height was mentioned. Kaiser mentioned that not a big issue, but density is a major component that needs to be addressed in our housing element. And as Kaiser mentioned, has to be looked at in the plan for further revisions. So to answer your question, large structural changes such as the ones that were recommended tonight, we were not anticipating.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that as Councilmember Garcia mentioned earlier, this is we do have a fairly new council, and some of us have not been involved in extensive conversations or joint council meetings that you guys have had in the past. I try to watch the videos that you guys send out, but we never really had the opportunity to give our input. So I think that by us coming back and as a group and trying to figure out what's the best way to go with this downtown specific plan, and hopefully there's not many modifications, we should stay within budget. Speaking of the budget, my last question to you is, what is the overall cost for this downtown specific plan?
So the overall cost is within what was granted to us by HCD, the state, which is $310,000.
And we may possibly be going over that budget?
That is correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So I think,
Mayor, just really quick. I just want to say, I know that this is not the first time I've mentioned, like having a range of density run. I don't think that, I don't know, there shouldn't be any shock or surprise where I stand on this, because I know we've had conversations, maybe not extensive conversations with Mr. Kaiser, but my question is, since there has been, a proposed high density and then an environmental, I guess, assessment attached to this, would it make sense to hold, to hold these, like what is being presented today as like the maximum amount that a developer could request and include in their application or their development, but create a baseline that gives us, so that, in other words, let's say a developer comes to the city and says, I want to propose a 4-story structure. And at baseline, we say, well, according to our specific plan, you are allowed a 3-story structure, but with, city planning commission and city council review, there is this discretionary action that could be provided so that you could go up to the 4 stories, or so that you could go up to the 5 stories where that might be allowed.
Yeah.
So that there's a range. And I know that you and I have talked about this in the past where, could there be a range, a baseline of, where we are comfortable to a maximum to meet some of these RHNA numbers and some of these other requirements. But it gives us full control to say no, to developer that comes in and says, I want to build a 5-story structure and it doesn't make sense for our downtown. And we could say no, because it just, so could we approach it that way?
Councilman Garcia, what you're suggesting is already part of this plan. I think whatever you just said is how we intend this to operate. Anybody coming in knows that the maximum they can build in those 4 corners is a 4-story element. The 5th story is a discretionary and it requires site plan approval. And for a discretionary approval, that's what it is. You can be arbitrary, you can almost be arbitrary, unreasonable, and capricious in your decision. You don't have to justify it because it's discretionary. It's not something that's allowed by right. It requires a site plan approval. So you retain that full capacity to say no. And in addition to that, you have the town architect working that would allow you to and help you to make those arguments why this is not a compatible project in the downtown area. So if you'd like, we can take a look at that language and maybe bring it up front and center and make it more clear that that's how this is intended to operate. But I'm glad you brought that up because that is perfectly how we want this to operate.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's something that we can discuss, again, at the next round and have the full council present and really understand clearly what would be allowed by right and what would be allowed with discretionary review and what those discretionary actions are exactly. So that I think what we want to do is we want to retain that control to make sure that any development that comes into downtown is one that we believe, works for the landscape of our downtown. I don't think we want to give that up. So if we could have a more in-depth conversation around that at the next, part of study session part 2, then that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council, and we'll see when we can do that, possibly in 2 weeks, if that's possible. We'll meet quickly on this and see what we can achieve.
Okay, that works. Is there any more questions or concerns? If
Hold
not,
on 1 sec. Let me just check. I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. I mean, sir, any of the attendees want to make any comments? Raise your hand or in the chat box. I don't want to miss any. I had to check the chat box real quick. All right. On the site. So we got one comment in the chat box. Thank you, Steve. So page 104 describes different allowed parking locations on a site based on podium surface parking versus subterranean parking. Is there a definition, the word subterranean, in the specific plan, or should the plan default to utilizing the building code definition of story above grade plane in order to determine whether parking is considered subterranean? Kaiser?
Right. We can certainly clarify that further. We define the building height, which is measured from the sidewalk. So anything below the sidewalk is considered subterranean.
Yeah.
And we can certainly clarify that further by defining that term subterranean if it hasn't been defined.
Thank you, Steve, for that comment. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. Looks like, we got one raised hand. Let's see, Mark, if you can unmute Beatrice Sandoval.
Thank you. I have a question. I know this all this project and design is by downtown. My question is to figure out of all the numbers of the housing to be building need to be in the downtown area or can be in other areas of the city?
Yeah, so yes, we under this plan, as I as we were describing earlier on, most of the density is being looked at in the downtown. Our housing element consultant, based on the downtown specific plan, most of those units are being counted to meet the RHNA within but within the downtown. But yes, the city can look at other areas of the city for increase in number of units.
And the other question is, for this specific plan, are you talking only about the numbers of the units need to be there, and are you not talking about like something like eco-friendly environment or something like water, recycled water process, something to make more ecological and more healthy and environment healthy, all this downtown? Is only for only present the project that housing needs, cover the housing need, but when you start to talking about how to make this more eco-friendly?
So just to highlight, Kaiser, if you want to add a little bit as far as
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
sustainability, I mean,
Yes,
part
I'm
of that,
talking about.
Well, a quick answer. I think I would recommend that you read the specific plan page. And ma'am, I'd be happy to send this to you, or Ron, if you send me your email. There's a section that talks about green infrastructure, which
Yeah.
precisely talks about all the things that you mentioned, requiring a hydrology study to mimic the site's pre-development runoff by choosing the appropriate low impact development practice, demonstrating that the flood levels upstream and downstreams of the project are not raised, and certainly meeting all of the NPDES ES standards. In addition to that, there's a lot of other provisions in the plan that talk about how to be green. There's going to be an emphasis on reducing the greenhouse gases, which will be also assessed in the environmental documentation, and that's related to the mixed use pattern, which is reducing the reliance primarily on automobile to get around, and the trees which help with greenhouse gases as well.
thank you, Kaiser.
Thank you, Ron. I participate in almost all meetings, the study session. Thank you for inviting me, inviting St. John the Baptist parishioners. But I had the other question. I'm sorry, I don't want to take too much of your time, but we're talking a lot about mixed use. But I don't remember talking about inclusionary housing and this downtown. Is that when we are going to talking about that?
No, good question, Beatriz. So the city right now, we've informed the council through our Measure H funds. Our consultant will be performing a feasibility study to determine what the appropriate percentage of affordable housing for an inclusionary zoning ordinance. That's coming to the council in late October, November. But this plan is not going to specifically address inclusionary housing, but fast forward, hypothetically, with the plan getting approved, and then the council, if the council desires to move forward with an inclusionary housing ordinance, what that does is says that that any future housing, whether it's 6%, 7% of housing proposed in the downtown, has to be for affordable units. So this plan doesn't, by doing an inclusionary housing ordinance, doesn't affect the specific plan or need changes. It's going to be an inclusionary housing ordinance for all housing development throughout the city.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Beatrice. Okay. Let's see here. Looks like I haven't got any more comments. Anyone else, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I think those are all the comments that we've received.
Great. So
Perfect.
we're all good, right?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your participation tonight and all your comments and taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight for the study session.
Yeah, and thank you, Ron and staff, and of course, Kaiser and his team. I think it's an important conversation that we're having on how we're going to shape Baldwin Park for the future. So looking forward to the continued discussion. At this point, if there's no more questions, comments, or concerns, I believe we are ready to adjourn the meeting. And so at this moment, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any objections? None. Meeting adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.